Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Philip Selwood. I'm the Chief Executive of the Energy Saving Trust, and it's my pleasure to be hosting this penultimate session. We've got a very eminent speaker. I'm sure many in the audience already know Juliet or know of Juliet. It's fair to say that Juliet's CV and LinkedIn page is one of the very few that makes me feel indolent and slothful. She has a whole host of areas of activity, from the private sector through to academia and research, but obviously is predominantly best known as the founder and current organizer and part owner, shall I say, of Good Energy. And so she's actually going to talk this afternoon about a different sort of energy system, one that isn't predominantly about centralized generation, but one it's about decentralized generation. So I'm not really going to say any more. We'll have an opportunity for Q&A afterwards. Juliet's going to speak for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll just throw it open to the audience. So with that, over to you, Juliet.
Thank you, Philip. So Philip has been in the energy industry for as long as I have, at least, if not longer, doing his best to make sure that all our homes are energy efficient and we have the lowest carbon energy. My name is Juliet Davenport. My background is I got interested in energy. I'm a scientist. I was an atmospheric physicist. I was interested in climate change. And if you look at climate change, energy and the way we use energy in our homes and our businesses is absolutely key to finding some of the solutions to climate change. And I've been working in this industry for 20 years trying to figure out some of the answers. And actually what's really exciting, and if you look at a lot of the displays today, a lot of them are talking about how do we make energy low carbon in our homes and low carbon in the way we heat them, in the way we light them, and in the way we transport ourselves from one place to another. So what I want to talk to you about today is something that everybody gets very worried about in a future scenario where we move to a low carbon scenario, something called energy security, i.e. that is that when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining, how do we get our power? And how do we manage that in a way that everybody gets the energy they need in every part of their lives? So one thing I want to start with is something called the grand challenges. So these are laid out as 3 out of the 4 big grand challenges in the UK right now. One is clean growth. How do we exist as an economy and continue to grow, but in a clean way, lowering our fossil fuel intake, lowering our carbon intake? The next part is that artificial intelligence and data is a key part of our lives today. And how we can use that for good and how we can transform our economy using AI and data is really important. And the final part is the future of mobility. How do we get from one place to another? And for me, what's really interesting about these are grand industrial challenges, but actually they encompass every part of a low carbon future. And if you look at the start of the first one, we are now in a renewable age. So if you look at certain countries, they're with over 90% renewables, countries like Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Uruguay, they already have implemented 90% of their electricity comes from renewable energy. If you look at places like Sweden, Norway, and Iceland, they're close to 100%. And in fact, Portugal announced this month that in March they were 100% renewable. So we're in a world where actually major renewable investments are really part of the everyday. They are no longer the exception. Kenya, Morocco, and China all making major investments in renewable energy. And we're seeing this tipping point, particularly with developing countries who are really becoming the major powers of tomorrow, somewhere like Vietnam, where potentially they could be building 37 new coal power stations, but instead they're likely to put solar on every roof they possibly can. So suddenly we see a transformation, and this looks very different from the old style of energy system that we saw before. In fact, in the UK, I think we were up to about 58% renewables in the last couple of weeks, where we've had significant wind power in the UK. So you can begin to see that that completely challenges the status quo. And currently, and I'm hoping that we might see a change in this, but we are quite stuck, or we see a lot of the narrative being stuck an old view of security. So security has to be that you light up a coal power station, you put some coal in it, you can completely control the levers, and that's fine. You've got your security, you can centrally control it. And it's considered dispatchable plants, something like coal or nuclear, or a baseload production, something like nuclear. And all policy design is really historically being designed around these large centralized power stations that can be centrally controlled. But what's really interesting about that is that, first of all, these really struggle in a low carbon world. And secondly, that is really an old mindset. We're kind of seeing a real transition from an old world generator where, so 20 years ago in the UK, we had 37 generators generating the whole of our electricity. Today, we have over 1 million power stations in the UK. And when I say 1 million power stations, a lot of those are households, people generating power in their home. And you can see that what that means is it creates a lot of challenges, because suddenly the system that was built to take power from one place and deliver it to lots of places is taking it from lots of places and delivering it to lots of other places. So you have a very different system. And one of the reasons why policymakers find it really hard is because this new system doesn't quite exist yet. So although we're using a system, we're using the distribution networks, the transmission networks to deal with that, it doesn't quite work in the future. And that is why we need to kind of start to think about how do renewable energy security support this market. And what's really interesting is traditionally when you think about the energy market, it is stopped at the meter that enters our homes. So most of you if you think of all these places as homes, if you thought of every single site in this building as somebody's home, the energy market has considered itself up to the point of delivery into the home. And then it's all assumed that you're all the same. You behave in exactly the same way. They have a profile class for you, and every single person in this room consumes power in exactly the same way. And they also assume that you cannot respond to any change in price. So most people, if you get on a train, you tend to know when off-peak is, yes? Peak travel, off-peak travel, and you know that if you travel in the peak, your ticket is probably 3 times the price as if you travel in off-peak. But most people don't know when the peak, the equivalent is in the energy market. So if you got home and you put the kettle on, you just assume it's going to be the same power usage as it is at any other time of the day. The reality is that power usage at 5 o'clock in the evening in the winter months has got a carbon intensity of about 3 times as much as any other time, and the price is about 4 times as much. So nobody is actually showing that to you. So what it means is that when we think about households are passive consumers. Households are not encouraged to be part of this system. And everybody and all the design of our policy and our marketplaces to date have delivered to the point of the household and not beyond. And this is where we see a really exciting potential. So in the future, what's going to be happening in our households is we're rolling out smart meters. Now, not all smart meters, and we can have this debate later, Philip, on smart metering and whether they're good or bad. But there are the potential for smart meters to really deliver flexibility in people's homes. A lot of people can put solar on their roofs if they have roof space. I think it's about 40% of the UK have the potential to put solar power into homes. You've then got the potential for some form of storage, whether that's you can turn on heating, you can use a heat storage or a battery storage. And potentially if you have a car or you have some kind of mobility that is electrically driven, you have the ability to charge at different times of day. Now, right now, this energy system is not incentivized in any way to do anything different than what they've always done. But if you imagine it, if you imagine a world where this can come together, it can actually work in synchronicity, suddenly these households become an active part of a network. They can become an active part of an energy system, and they can deliver value back to that energy system. I think University of Salford is here today. It's a piece of research we did with them recently, which was electric vehicle to grid charging. And what that means is that when there is a problem on the national grid, where there's a shortage of power, you can take power out of an electric vehicle and charge the grid up. And normally it's very short periods of time, so it doesn't use a lot of that power. But what we worked out is that that would mean that each car who was part of that system could be paid £300 a year to charge their car. So that's completely the opposite to how we expect our transport to work. Normally, we go to a petrol station, we fill it up, and we pay for that petrol. In the future, a car is a mobile storage system. So that has value in our future system. But right now, the system is not designed to give us that value back as individuals or as consumers. And that is what we kind of see in the future, is the opportunity for AI and consumer systems to really deliver a value to a marketplace that it's never seen before. And we're beginning to see this technology. So one of the things right now is that there's a lot of different parts of technology you can see in this room today. What it doesn't necessarily do is come together. It doesn't come together in a single entity that then can create value for the consumer. And that is the vision that we see as an organization going forward, is where consumers can tap into the value in the energy market. And rather than having to run a large-scale gas power station or a large-scale hydrogen power station or a CCGT plant, you can be part of that. And you can aggregate with your neighbor next door, you could trade with your power station. But most people are not going to be sitting there. Now, there will be some people who will have spreadsheets and will work out how to sell their power, and they will be very excited by it, and my dad is probably one of them. But there are a lot of people who won't. And one of the things I have a vision for is something called let the home do the hard work. So that you get up in the morning, you use all the power or the heat or the light that you need to use, you close the door and you go off to work. And actually your house then becomes an active power station on the system. It starts to trade on your behalf. It switches off when it gets the right signal. It starts to decide, I don't need the heating on now. I can switch it on a bit later, and I can switch up because the house will contain that heating because I've got great energy efficiency. And suddenly you can begin to see a flexibility that we've never seen before in this marketplace. And it's not just for households. Obviously, businesses are going to be part of this as well. They're going to have people who are driving to work, potentially in an electric vehicle, and they're going to be plugging in at work. Suddenly you've got a whole battery in your car park at work that you could bid into an electrical system and earn money either for your company or give free electricity to your employees so they can get to work. So this is a whole different concept of actually how we design our systems. What I think is really exciting is you look at something like electric vehicles. For me, this is just storage on wheels. So most people will look at a car and think about how to get from one place to another. I think about how I can aggregate it in an energy system and create value for it. And what's fascinating about that, we've just seen the recent targets that are set on 2035 to make sure that electric vehicles are going to be the only vehicle you can actually buy new going forwards. And we're seeing this market grow significantly. It's not just in this country. Sometimes we get quite focused on UK energy policy. What you've got to look at is that China is moving this direction as well. Sort of worldwide, we are seeing these movements. And so suddenly you get a whole fleet of a fleet of transport systems that were never part of our energy system before. They were never part of a low carbon system. And you have a world where you get paid to deliver power. So for me, the future of energy security in the UK will be customer centric. What that means is that the customer won't be excluded. The customer won't be expected to be the problem. There was many time when the national grid systems basically used to read the Radio Times to figure out when they had to switch on and off power stations. So what they were trying to do is predict consumer behavior around very popular TV programs. Now my view is that should be something of the past. We should be actually giving signals to consumers to behave in different ways, or if not to them, to their houses. So their houses then respond to those signals to deliver power and use power at the most effective time that we can see there. And for me, what are the added benefits from that? So right now, I think we focus very much, there is probably about 20% of consumers who really focus on what their energy bills are. They know them very well, they know how much it costs them, because actually it's a very significant part of their income. But there are 80% of us who it's not such a significant part. And we just did a recent test with a group of people in my office, where we gave them a detailed information set that told them exactly what was using what power in their home. So how much was in their kettle, how much was their entertainment system using, how much was their fridge using. And what one of our guys discovered was that their fridge freezer is on constantly. So it's not cycling. Normally fridge freezers cycle. They kind of keep to a temperature and keep going back. What that meant was 20% of his energy was going on his freezer. Now, he didn't even notice. He would never have picked that up unless you started feeding that data back to him. And what that means is that potentially the 80% of the market who we don't focus on a lot have unwittingly using energy which they don't need. And suddenly you can begin to see a house that starts to behave better because we're providing data to either the users in it or the people there. I think the other potential is that we can potentially protect vulnerable customers by reducing the cost of the systems that we need to deliver power to people and using them more effectively. We were just talking to our regulator today, and we reckon about, if you use our energy networks are probably utilized about 30 to 40% of the time. That means they've got up to 60 to 70% capacity on them that's not being utilized. So if you put more power through those systems, you could deliver it cheaper to people's homes. And that would benefit everybody on the system. And my final view is that this has the potential to work all over the world. It's not just us who are trying to solve this problem. I recently met with the Singaporean government who are trying to figure out how they can be low carbon in a world where they have no land, they have no offshore wind, they have no onshore wind, they have no solar. And actually, the potential is they have 5 million customers who could suddenly become a battery or a demand-side response system for countries that are next to them. And we could take the technologies that we understand here and export them to countries like that. So for me, welcome to a new world order, a world where customers become part of the solution and are not the problem. And energy systems and homes work together, not separately. I call this, or we called it a while ago, something called an intelligent energy democracy. This means that everybody is part of our energy system. It's an intelligent system, and we all have ownership of it. And for me, that is what taking responsibility of climate change is that we allow everything we do to be part of a system that can solve the problem in the future. Thank you very much for listening, and we're going to take questions now, aren't we?
Okay, thanks, Juliet. We're going to get a chance for people to ask questions. Hopefully, yes, there's a lady at the back with a microphone. I just wanted to perhaps abuse the chairman's privilege by asking the first question. Yep. Going back to your first slide about the 3 grand challenges, all absolutely pertinent, all relying on many, many different actors to pull this off. How can we conceive that those things will be brought together, and who is going to be responsible, if anybody is going to be responsible, for pulling that together?
So I think there is a sort of wide challenge across kind of 3 key areas. One is research and innovation. So that's looking at new technologies, new university insight, bringing that to market and understanding what that can do for us. The next part is actually how the energy markets work. As I've suggested, the energy markets were originally designed around large power stations. They weren't designed to think about my homes as a power station. And actually making sure that that marketplace really delivers to be able to take and integrate with people's homes and businesses is really important. And the final part is consumer, is really making sure that consumers are protected and empowered. And when I say protected, there are many cases where consumers have been sold the green vision and actually it hasn't been delivered. And we need to make sure that the technologies in this room really do what they say they're going to do, that consumers, when they implement them in their homes, they get the value, both from a green point of view, but also from a value point of view. And so there is a leading role for universities in innovation. There's a leading role for government. And there is a leading role for organizations, companies, and for consumers. So I do think it's across the piece. But one of the things that I'm trying to get across to government is that there should be no backward steps. Yep. That they have to think about always moving forward on climate change. Because this marketplace is so complicated, they need to give a sort of mantra that overall, no backward step on climate.
I think that's really important because it's so very easy to see it's so complex. So therefore, don't do anything, or even worse, do something that takes us backwards. Okay, have we some questions from the audience? There's a lady here. Perhaps if you just say who you are, if you wish to. Could you turn the mic on? Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. My name's Claire Sutton from MH Architects. I'm really interested in this idea of using cars as batteries, mobile batteries, so that they can work as a battery at home and at work. But I was wondering how much the idea of driverless cars, which I think are going to be active in the next 10 to 20 years, is going to affect that. Because as an architect, I'm quite excited at the prospect of driverless cars, because it means I don't have to provide loads of on-site parking. Yeah. The cars can all be stored in little boxes somewhere else, and then you just give them a call and they come and get you. But then that prevents them working as directly to your house storage.
You don't. I mean, I think there will be a mixture. So there will always be properties, particularly in rural areas, that driverless cars just won't work. Because what you really need on a driverless car is the lines on the road, because that's what guides the car. So they all have to have those lines. That's part of how they operate. So I think we'll always have a proportion that will be driverless and the part that won't be driverless. But you can use driverless cars as a battery storage backup wherever. It doesn't have to be in your home. So some cases it will be in people's homes, and some cases it won't. The potential in the people's homes is you don't just have to use electrical storage. You could look at heat storage, for example. So if you've got a home that is electrically heated, you could look at making sure you've got super energy efficient, and you can heat at a time of day that's effective, or you could use a heat battery, which is another technology that we're beginning to see come through. So it's really thinking holistically about it, rather than trying to choose which technology. I think there will be opportunities for all of them. And what we must make sure is we design marketplace in a way that allows for change and allows for innovation.
Thanks for the question. At the risk of being slightly controversial, the best driverless car, of course, is one that you don't have to drive at all. And I think the revolution that Juliet's outlined is going to give us all many more opportunities to operate not from long distance, but either from home or more locally. Anyway, just my view. Sir, gentleman here.
Hiya, Archie Laster from Utilita Energy. You were talking about all the different technologies that could be installed in people's homes, storage, disaggregated demand, energy efficiency things, but in my experience, people that are adopting these now, and certainly in the short term, are people that can afford to. For those customers, the vulnerable ones, people in rented properties, people with low income, how do you see the energy transition filtering into those houses and for those customers?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, the first point that I made was that I think if we can use existing distribution networks more effectively by using these technologies. So you're right, there will be a technology adoption curve. So if I remember rightly, I don't know whether I can remember the original mobile phones, which were very ugly and very large and very expensive. And we saw those come down a technology curve and a price curve. I think we can see the same coming through on energy technologies. So from a vulnerable customer point of view, there are two protections from my point of view. One is if we use existing distribution networks, which is what 30% of the energy bill today is what we pay for the wires. Now, if we could see that drop to 25% or 20% for everybody, that's going to be a good thing for vulnerable customers as well as normal customers. I think the other piece is that we believe already that solar installed on people's homes, which is funded by a third party, whether it's a social housing organization or a local council, is already delivering lower cost energy than they can get through the networks. So we think some of those technologies are ready to go. Part of it is about making sure there's the structure and the funding structure to deliver that. So we work with about 150,000 households who generate power in their own homes. Around 50% of those are social housing organizations who are generating power for their tenants, reducing their bills and helping address fuel poverty and fuel vulnerability.
Okay, thanks very much. Yes, sorry,
Hello.
Gentleman at the back.
Hello. Yeah, so it's Paul Harmer from the Chartered Institute of Plumbing and Heating Engineering. I've got a question about the consumer regarding the adoption of these new technologies such as heat pump. How are we going to support the consumer, bearing in mind that this is a big behavioural change? So we're talking about the adoption of new technologies, but we've got a complete behavioural change to bear in mind. So, for example, most consumers have instantaneous hot water. There's probably 17.5 million combination boilers out there on the market. They're used to instantaneous hot water. Suddenly they're going to have to start operating a hot water cylinder, for example, and they might be used to turning their heating on in the morning quickly. Now they've got to start looking at a different way of heating their homes with lower temperatures. So how are we going to support the consumer in this early adoption stage?
So I think that's a really good question, and I think there are many ways that you can support the consumer in that. So one of the key ways is government. So government can support in terms of education, because a lot of the time the new companies can't come in and do that whole education piece. So if you think about where government has lent into energy policy and particularly consumer behaviour, there's been a lot of push on switching supply on price. Government really pushed behind that. My personal view is that's one part that government can move to. I think you also have to see that backed up by significant energy efficiency, because the point about low heating, particularly that switch, which I personally went through when I put a heat pump in my own home, is that you have to do the energy efficiency first. Otherwise, you really do disappoint the consumer behaviour side of it. And that is a really important part that both the industry and government need to make sure that we are doing that. So I know Philip probably is pushing very hard for this. We're definitely pushing that energy efficiency needs to be a key part of what is being rolled out by this government. And I don't particularly believe that the way it's been done before, where you've asked energy companies who essentially have their bill, if an energy company invests in energy efficiency, you reduce their margin. So my personal view is that you should take that away from the energy companies doing it and widen it out, even make it a tradable system, so that you can actually get benefits as an organisation like yourselves for installing energy efficiency and heat pump at the same time, and you can take the subsidy directly from government rather than it going from an energy company. But I agree, I mean, behavioural change is a long and difficult challenge. It's not straightforward, but having government support behind it and making sure, what was really interesting, if you take smart metering, for example, we met the guys who did the advertising for government on smart metering, and the first part of their advertising was really government policy. They were trying to sell that this was going to save people money, and nobody believed it and nobody was interested in it. When they actually went out to consumers and found out what consumers actually wanted to know, which was about smart, actually could it deliver on a low carbon world, they've had much better cut through and the advertising is much better. So government, when they get it right and don't try and be political about it, can do a good job.
Just, if I can just add, because this is my day job really, I think the other thing that, I mean, I agree with everything Juliet's saying. I think the other thing that we need to do, which we've not really done previously with technology shift, is actually start from where the customer is, not where we would like to think they are. So emphasize simplicity, access, transparency, and benefits. I mean, all very boring stuff, but actually, if you explain to people in simple narratives what they can do and what benefits they can derive, it's amazing how quickly people will adopt technology. Telling them that it's part of government policy and it's a thing they should be doing and they're a bad person if they don't, is absolutely the way to fail. Sorry, lecture over. Other questions? Have we got? I'm just going to ask one. Oh, sorry, gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Pete. I put 36 solar panels onto a social housing builds this week in Tower Hamlets. So thanks very much for the hard work you've done to get that online. I owe you £900. Sorry, it's on my list.
I'll tell my guys.
No, I'm not ready yet. Right, this batteries as banks, cars as banks is wonderful. Singapore as a batteries are wonderful. I wonder, have you got any other blue sky thinking there? Because that's just blowing my mind.
All right, okay. Blue sky thinking. So I think we should stop thinking about heat and light and transport separately. They all need to be part of one thing. So what I'm really excited about is that, so there are technologies like hydrogen, which isn't a fix, it's not a solution on its own. But if you begin to see, so we're beginning to see particularly, as we see climate change increase in the UK, one of the things we will see is more stormy events, particularly as I'm sure you've recognised that through the whole of February. And one of the opportunities there is you get a significant production, very high production of renewables, particularly wind power. And you can begin to see a time when you could start to use that to supplement the gas market, because obviously you're then producing hydrogen from excess wind, because you'll have too much wind. Right now what we do is we switch the wind farms off. So that is our way of dealing when we've got too much wind. So let's never switch a wind farm off. Let's always keep them on and find a way to use that energy more usefully, that we could then deliver that hydrogen at low cost, which could then support sort of a heating system in the UK. So we need to really think of a whole systems approach. That's a UK approach. You then begin to look at, okay, so what could you do in Northern Africa? How many solar panels could you roll out in Northern Africa that would then support the whole of Southern Europe in terms of their energy supply? You put interconnectors across. So what I think is exciting is when you do really high-level, large-scale stuff and local-level stuff and integrate the two together, because we need both. But actually having a consumer being able to be part of that and take advantage of the fact, if it's really windy, then we should all have really cheap power. And we should be able to take an opportunity to do things in our homes and have and deliver power to people's homes at a much cheaper price. So I think we should be thinking of a system level locally in our homes, but at a really international level as well.
Okay. That's two firsts. Sorry, I'll come to it. Two firsts. One is man agrees to pay his bill. Fantastic. Secondly, storms are a benefit. I like that. There's a lady here.
Hello, my name is Joyce Guillaume. Probably the opposite of blue sky thinking. It's where the consumer is at the moment. I do have domestic solar panels with feed-in tariff with good energy, so thank you very much. And what do you think at the moment is the most practical way of storing my excess solar energy?
So it really depends on what you have in your home in terms of electrical usage. So if you've got a heating system that's electrical, then obviously that's a very simple way. Again, you can use your solar system to heat the home, and then as long as you're not letting it all out at the same time, you've got a storage system, which is your house. The other opportunity is that you could put a battery in. They're a little expensive at the moment. I mean, if you've got an electric vehicle, that's easier because you could charge that at the same time. But really, it's about how you flex your demand is the most effective way, and then you can look at a technology to see how you could do further than that. I mean, there are other possibilities. We can't quite do it yet because the regulation doesn't allow us. But I mean, there is a future where you could trade it with your neighbour as a potential. So rather than actually being charged to deliver power through the networks, which is a huge cost at the moment, actually if you said, I live next door to somebody and I can get a small charge, but I could deliver power to my next door neighbour. I think there's a technology company called Sonnen here today who've been trying to do some trials with that in Germany. And that is another potential. It's not just about you, it's about you and a community, and you see a kind of wider piece. It extends beyond just your home.
Just to add, they've actually got some live. Sonnen have actually got some live pilots, so go and have a chat to them. They may be able to help. Okay, have we got a lady here in the front?
Hi, my name's Catherine from CJ Design. I'm just interesting because you were saying about hydrogen not being the answer, and we've gone to quite a few like the CIBSE Power Hour seminars and stuff where the discussion is about heating homes for the future, because obviously with gas being taken out of the equation or trying to reduce like heavily, but no one seems to be willing to kind of like put their neck on the line and saying about whether it's going to be heat pumps or hydrogen. And so is your view that it's just going to be like electricity just all the way in terms of the future? Or?
No, I think it's going to be a combination. So this is a piece of work we're trying to do at the moment, is to really look at the potential for all the different technologies. So one of them is green gas, potentially in the UK, which is created from anaerobic digestion, waste food quite often, waste products could account. I think there's a potential for up to about 10% of our gas grid from that. You then look at hydrogen, and you could put up to 20% volume of hydrogen into the current gas grid, as far as I understand, without any technological change, because the thing about hydrogen is it doesn't behave in the same way as methane. So, but that doesn't have the same calorific value because hydrogen is less dense. So you've got some parts you can begin to do on gas, and then you can look at electrification and energy efficiency, and then demand-side response. So the reason why you're not getting an answer is nobody's actually done the complete piece of work to figure it out yet. And there's a lot of emotional conversations. I heard somebody from, might be a very large boiler installer, who said, you're going to rip all the boilers out of people's homes. It's like, nobody's ever going to do that. If there's any kind of boiler replacement, it will be at the end of life cycle. And there needs to be a whole sort of behavioural piece around it as well. But yeah, so the point is, there isn't an answer yet. We are working on what we think the answer is. I think government's trying to figure it out as well.
My only additional advice is to beware the technology zealot. So the person who says, we have the answer, or they don't have the answer, because the reality is probably we need all of the above and probably a few we haven't even thought of yet.
Thanks.
Sorry, any more questions? One I just wanted to ask Juliet, because somebody asked me to ask it. You talked a lot about data.
Yes.
And painted a very rosy picture of how that data could be shared and used. There are many people who are absolutely terrified at the prospect of that data being shared more widely than their home. How do you think we need to persuade the public not only to adopt the technologies, but the benefits that data are going to deliver for them?
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting about that is a journey. You can't do it in one piece. You have to take consumers on a journey. So the first piece is if consumers will share some data, you then have to show a benefit. One of the things that you can do immediately, we've seen some pieces where consumers have shared data, more detailed data, then people can, one of the things we're looking at is making sure they're on the right tariff. That's a very simple way that you can start to build trust with consumers. The second piece is then you can start to provide them advice about what they can do with the data. So whether it looks like they have a particular issue at a time of day, or there's something particularly not working in their home very effectively. And that's what we have to do, Philip. You have to build a trusted approach. And to date, I think where you've got a lot of large companies who've been incentivized very much by their shareholders and making sure they're ever increasing dividends, that hasn't really been on the agenda. And I think that is something that energy companies have to change. If they want to move to that world, we're going to have to build a trust with the consumer. And what's been really interesting is a couple of people have talked about having power generation in their homes. As an organization, we've always had a two-way conversation on energy with consumers. So people generate power and sell it to us, and we sell them power. So there's a kind of two-way process. And what's been really interesting is that I think we've built more trust that way because we're not completely in control. They have partial control of their energy, and I think that gives people more confidence about data.
Okay, we've got probably time for one more question. Sorry, we got a gentleman in the back.
Hello. Yeah, sorry, it's Paul Harmer again, CIPHE. It was touching on the gentleman's question earlier about the storing of energy, and he got excited about how that PV could be turned into thermal energy. We're seeing a hell of a lot of research going into phase change materials, which means you can have a higher energy density in a smaller space, which enables both electrical power and thermal power to go in, which makes it more a varied energy source. One of the challenges that I'm seeing, and obviously I'm talking to government about, is how the challenge of the supply chain. Our supply chain in the plumbing heating industry is a very complex, very controlled environment. So how do we get over that chasm in the innovation adoption curve, or what can government do to enable those technologies to be more accessible and the economic gap to be closed?
Can I ask a question back just for clarification? How much people like, I think Energy Systems Catapult are here and Innovate UK, I mean, how much are they doing today? Are they doing enough, or are they not doing?
Well, funny you said that. I've got a meeting with them on the 23rd So I'll be able to tell you a bit more then.
Yeah, I mean, I sit on the board of Innovate UK.
Okay.
And for me, this is one of the big areas. We have we've spent a very small amount on energy research in this country. We have some of the best researchers. We have the best environmental research in the world, and we do not use it enough. And I think for me, it's the role of Innovate and Innovate UK to make sure that we're bringing that innovation through from research into companies like yours.
But we also need to look at grassroots as well, because I'm coming across some really innovative individuals out there. We can't ignore them. Yeah. We need to get right, and that's the challenge.
Agreed.
Anyway.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? If not, I am now between you and a cup of tea. So please, could you show your appreciation for Juliet in the usual fashion?
Thank you, Philip.